Good afternoon. I hope everyone enjoyed their lunch. It was delicious. And of course, we're going to serve beef at a beef and forage conference. So thank you to our caterers for that, as Pam had mentioned. I'm Elizabeth Nurnberg, and I'm with Manitoba Agriculture from the Roblin area. And I'm pleased to introduce John Hart to lead off our afternoon session. John is a certified wildlife biologist with a wildlife degree from the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point. He currently owns and operates his own business, Custom Wildlife Capture and Consulting. John has been involved with wolf damage management in northern Minnesota since 1989, which has included the caption of depredating wolves, training and supervision of trappers, and assisting with the development of the Minnesota Wolf Management Plan. Myself and a few of my colleagues like Cindy and Ray had the pleasure of working with John this fall in delivering 5 trapper workshops across the province, which was a huge success and have been very well received. And so we're excited to have John at our conference and looking forward to hearing more about his experiences, as well as he can teach us a few things about wolf biology. With that, I'll turn it over to John, and if you can join me in welcoming him here again to Manitoba.
Thanks for that kind introduction, Elizabeth, and it's a really good opportunity, and I'm thankful to be here today. And my name is John Hart. I'm a wildlife biologist by training, but a trapper by trade, so a little bit of a hybrid. I'm not a livestock producer, although I've been working with Minnesota farmers and ranchers since the late 1980s on wolf damage management issues. Keeping the wolf from the door is an old adage that has real meaning for many of you in the room today. And so my plan today is to share with you some of my experiences from Minnesota, as well as some of the things that I think apply here in Manitoba, and there's a lot of overlap. Very similar habitat, very similar situations. So we'll just keep rolling. So I changed this slide last night. I was reading through it, and I said, you know what? I don't know if there are a place where wolves and cattle overlap where there isn't almost always conflict. And it's not just Manitoba, it's not just Minnesota. Large parts of Canada, the US, Asia, and surprisingly, even a lot of Western Europe has wolves recovering now, and they have the exact same issues that you all face here and we face in Minnesota. Germany, France, Italy, Spain. Most of the Western European countries now have wolves, even Middle Eastern countries like Israel. So you're not alone. So I don't know if that means like we commiserate together, but we can hopefully work together and come up with some tools that can help us. So there's really been a lot of studies looking at wolf livestock conflicts, but the real message is that where wolf habitat and cow habitat overlap, that's where there's issues, right? And in places like northern Minnesota and Manitoba, this is often that forest agricultural transition zone. And in Minnesota, that's this area right here. This is forest, public land, this is agriculture, row crops, and it's that zone, and that continues on up into Manitoba up here, into Saskatchewan, goes east into Wisconsin. It's kind of the same situation. So, you know, in southwestern Manitoba, there's no wolf damage to livestock because there's no wolves. And in northeastern Manitoba, there's no wolf damage to livestock because there's no livestock. So it's these in-between areas where there's enough undeveloped, often publicly owned land to support wolves and enough private land or community pasture to support cows. And that's really the wolf conflict zone. So in Minnesota, wolf damage is largely occurs at family-owned beef cow-calf operations, and I think it's similar here from what I can see. Most damage is to calves, but sometimes adult cattle are killed. Damage to livestock can be occasional and opportunistic, or it can be frequent and chronic. And wolves killing livestock is a learned behavior. They generally prefer wild prey ungulates, but the pivot to cattle is pretty easy for them. Wolf kills are characterized by severe trauma, heavy feeding, and sometimes nearly complete consumption of the carcass. This can lead to missing calves and undocumented losses. Also keep in mind that there are many other sources of mortality for cattle besides wolves. Other predators, coyotes, black bears, domestic dogs, disease, accidents, toxic plants, lightning, theft, etc. To have a useful conversation about managing wolf damage, I felt like we needed to understand some things about wolves, including some misconceptions. And so we're going to spend a little time talking about wolf biology and how it meshes with beef production or doesn't mesh with beef production. But let's start off with a few misconceptions. So I hear this one a lot. Wolves that prey on livestock are sick, are injured, are old, are young, are kicked out of the pack. Whatever. Some of them are, but the reality is wolves that kill livestock are usually just ordinary, healthy wolves from a pack that has access to livestock. So, pretty straightforward. Here's another one. Every domestic animal being eaten by wolves was killed by wolves. The reality is wolves are predators and scavengers, and scavenging dead livestock can be an important seasonal food source for wolves, especially in the springtime. So everyone thinks of the wolf as a predator, and when they see cattle hair and a wolf scat, they automatically assume predation, but it might just be a wolf eating on a dead animal. Wolf depredations are common in Minnesota April through October, coinciding with calving and the summer grazing season. There's generally a slight dip in June related to deer fawns and kind of prey availability. Get my little laser going here. So things are slow in the winter, January, February, March. Calving time picks up. April, May, a little dip in June when deer fawns come online, and then July and August when cattle are on summer pasture, and we'll talk about this period a little bit later, and then things taper off into the fall. And I think it's probably a similar trajectory here with damage. Losses can occur in the wintertime, but they're generally way lower. So here we go. We're going to kind of get into the year of what it looks like to be a wolf in cattle country and how that works. So a wolf is a family group that has a large territory, often covering an area the size of 2 or 3 townships, depending on prey base and habitat. And it can be bigger, it can be smaller, but the point is they cover a really big area. And a lot of times we see wolf tracks on our place, the neighbors see them on their place, and we start doing math. Well, I saw tracks of 5, they saw tracks of 4, the other neighbors saw tracks of 8. When they start doing math, it's really a lot of times always the same wolf pack covering a big area. The wolves actively defend their territory from other wolves. They don't like neighbors. And January is the kickoff to breeding season and finds the wolf pack patrolling its territory, and that's kind of when courtship begins for wolves. Generally just one male and one female breed in a pack, but multiple breeding females have been documented fairly regularly, especially when prey is abundant. So by wintertime, on the cattle side, by wintertime most calves have been sold and adult cows are close to home, being fed hay, so opportunity for predator losses is low, but it can still occur. Mid-February is generally the peak of wolf breeding season, and it's coming into the time when some producers are starting to calve, and this is when conflicts can really pick up. So calving continues through the spring months, and it sounds like it maybe peaks in the spring month. Every operation is a little bit different, and some maybe as early as January, some as late as May, but springtime is when a lot of these calves are born. And meanwhile, wolves are into a really lean time of the year. From the time the snow melts until the deer, elk, and moose young are born and the ice melts, which allows them increased access to beaver, wolves are often very food stressed. So while that's going on the other side of the fence where you guys are, this coincides with when many producers are calving. So there are all the sights and sounds, smells, and tastes of food around a cattle operation. Afterbirth, dead livestock, calf manure, and lots of live vulnerable calves make the local cow pasture a more frequently visited place by predators in the springtime. And that often leads to wolf and coyote depredations on cattle. Oftentimes these springtime depredations are related to an abundance of that yearling age class of wolves. These are last year's pups. They're adult sized, but they're not super efficient hunters yet. And sometimes springtime depredations can be driven by that breeding pair that's denning and the need to feed that adult female that's in a den hole taking care of those pups. So here's an early spring situation. You can see, late winter, early spring, dead cow, and you see all these tracks here. Those are all wolf tracks. The local wolf pack is right there. And if you're calving right over the hill, you've maybe started the equation to have more losses than you want to have. There's not always a link, but if you start feeding wolves intentionally or unintentionally, they're going to stay where the food is, especially in the springtime when things are tough. And so you don't want every wolf in 2 or 3 townships on or near your place. So move into the summertime, right? So by late May, the wild prey becomes more available to wolves in the form of deer, elk, and moose young. Dispersing beaver are still out there. And this is also the time that pastures are greening up and producers can turn out cow-calf pairs onto pastures. June, oftentimes we see a real short-term drop in depredations because of the increase in that wild prey. But that's generally pretty short-lived. As those young of the year ungulates get eaten up pretty quick, the ones that are vulnerable, the ones that don't get eaten grow up and get bigger and faster and are harder for the wolves to catch. So what's going on then in the wolf world is wolf pups are weaned and they're getting bigger. They're, by June 15th or July 1, they're 15 or 20 pounds. They're weaned, they're on a meat diet, usually regurgitated meat from the adults. And then that can start to lead to some pretty significant problems in summertime pastures with wolf losses. So what happens is at some point, those adult wolves that are bringing meat back to provision those pups realize it's easier to bring the pups to whatever they just killed. And if that happens to be a beef calf or a cow on your place, you're going to have the whole group there localized in your pasture. And that can just lead to a lot of issues in the late summer months. And during that summertime, that yearling age class, the non-breeding wolves, they're able to grab a deer fawn, a beaver, whatever, sometimes a calf. But a lot of times those summertime depredations are really driven by that adult pair provisioning those pups. By August 15th, those pups are 35 or 40 pounds bigger than a coyote, and they're eating like a bunch of teenagers in your house. You just cannot keep enough groceries in the refrigerator for them. So then fall, kind of coming into this time of year. By mid to late September, the pups can be approaching adult size. Keep in mind that wolf pups are kind of slow to develop compared to fox and coyotes. They have their milk teeth, their puppy teeth until about late August, early September. And a lot of producers think that pups are killing livestock in August. And I really haven't seen evidence of that. They're certainly feeding on it. And they're part of the reason livestock is being killed. But the pups are really inefficient predators, probably until they're like a year old. And even at that point, they're not that good. But they're big and they eat a lot, and so that drives a lot of the depredations. So by September, the pups are big enough to travel with the adults. They've got their adult teeth. They're cruising around with the pack, but they're still really not predators themselves. It sounds like there isn't as much of a tradition of fall calving in Manitoba as there is in parts of northern Minnesota. But for those producers that fall calve, predation can be a really serious issue. It's like April all over again as far as losses go, just because of baby calves, afterbirth, dead stock related to calving, etc. But by late October, most producers have gathered up their cattle, calves are sold, and things kind of slow down for the wintertime. So that's just kind of sets the stage for understanding the problem a little bit. So what can the producer do? Be proactive and have a plan, and develop a toolbox of techniques and strategies that work for you. And every operation's a little bit different, and we heard other speakers talk this morning about that, and absolutely you need to do what works for you. And predation management might not be at the top of your list. You've got 100 other things to worry about as far as pasture, hay, feed, markets, equipment, family interactions at home, succession management. There's a lot of things going on. So predation management may not be your primary consideration. So what I'm going to say from here on out, grab it if it works for you. We can talk more about it. We'll have time for questions and answers afterwards. But anyway, the toolbox isn't as deep as we'd like it to be. We'll talk about the tools that are in there, and they all have limitations. You're not going to pound a nail with a wrench, and you need to have kind of the right tool for the job, but usually it's a combination of tools. But collaborate with agency staff. This is really a good opportunity. I'm so happy to see Manitoba agriculture people here with producers, and that's really, really helpful. And I think it's way easier to talk about this issue over a cup of coffee or lunch than it is over a dead calf on June 15th when everyone's got a lot of other things to do. And unfortunately, that's when I got to meet a lot of producers, was over a dead calf. So think of wolf damage management as a four-legged stool, right? So you've got some conflict prevention, some non-lethal things you can do. And you can do them as a producer. Agencies can help you. We've got here available in Manitoba directed wolf removal through the Manitoba Trappers Association and the Wildlife Branch, the Targeted Predator Removal Program, compensation for verified losses. And then the fourth leg of the stool that's pretty important is you've got public harvest that's allowed. Public harvest by hunters and trappers, and the ability for landowners to take wolves. So in Minnesota, similar issues, similar everything. We basically have the equivalent of these three. Minnesota producers would be tickled to death to have this one as well. And so while it may not be perfect what you have here, my sense is that the program is okay. And whenever you're dealing with wolf damage management, if you're in the business that I was in all those years, if nobody is completely happy, you're probably doing your job well. And that's kind of a miserable place to be sometimes, but the reality is the public, oftentimes the urban public and other people from other areas, have a vested interest in wildlife, and they have a lot to say about it. And unfortunately, in the culture we live in, they have some influence. And then on the other side, you got the producer dealing with issues, and so we're kind of stuck in the middle. But anyway, work with your agency staff, get to know them, try to get along with them, but keep in mind that there are some tools available, and take advantage of them and use them. You can sit in your hands and complain, but the reality is do all you can. Livestock producers have been facing a zillion challenges over the years. Do what you've always done, adapt and overcome, and keep moving forward. That's really the only way. So we'll talk about a little bit more about some specifics here. So if you can, keep animals out of riskier pastures with high wolf traffic until calves get bigger if possible. That's not always the situation, but if you can, that certainly helps. Smaller calves are more vulnerable to predation, and they're also a lot harder to find to verify for damage and compensation because the wolves can eat them up, carry them away. So the larger an animal is before it's moved to pasture, the better off you're going to be, and the lower the predation risk. If you've got animals that are sick or injured or otherwise compromised, don't put them out in the pasture. Wolves are experts at figuring out who's the easiest to catch. That's their business, right? That's how they evolved. And you put a cow out there with hoof rot or that's lame or whatever, and it's isolated from the rest of the herd. The wolves come, kill it, camp out on it for a week. When it's done, they're looking for something else to eat, and they're right in your pasture. So some grazing practices. Again, lots of other considerations on the farm, but from a predation management standpoint, a herd at relatively high stocking density can reduce the rate of encounters with predators and maximize the probability that the entire beef herd will detect a predator there, right? We call it a herd because cattle are herd animals, and if there's a herd of them, if I'm a wolf coming into this paddock right here in the Gillespie Center and you guys are cows and calves, I'm pretty intimidated. I'm not going to probably do much. But if there's one calf off to the side or whatever, that's the one I'm going to go after. And so if you can keep your herd together, that helps. And most beef herds are good at doing that anyway, but smaller pastures can help. I saw some really big pastures, bigger than I'm used to when we were doing the wolf trapper workshops up in the Ashern and Mulvey Hill area. And if you turn cattle out June 1st, and you bring them back in October, and you expect to have a calf with every cow, that's probably not a realistic expectation if you don't see them for 4 months. So having some smaller pastures, which result in higher stocking densities and rotating them around, is going to keep your herd together. It's going to get your eyes on your cows more often as you move them. You're going to be able to get a count on them. You're going to be able to detect losses, hopefully verify some losses for compensation, and get some trapping assistance if you need it. I'm going to flip through on a couple notes and make sure I'm not missing anything. But yeah, that's really some of the key points there. And we've got some other tools here. Here's kind of a laundry list of things. And it's really interesting. I spent a little time visiting with Ray Bittner, who used to work for the province here today, doing their non-lethal and conflict prevention program a few years ago, and it sounds like his program and our program were on very parallel paths, and we went through a lot of these tools, and some worked and some didn't, and we'll talk more about them. But keep in mind that placement and timing and duration of these tools as they relate to protecting domestic animals is critical. Also keep in mind that all of these tools and techniques are best used proactively before there's documented predation. So that's the best time to do all the non-lethal stuff in my mind. Once wolves start killing livestock, it can be really hard to stop that using non-lethal methods, in my experience. So after predation starts, it just gets more challenging to stop, and so do what you can to not have predation start. And sometimes that's just going to happen, but try to resolve it as soon as you can. The longer it goes, the worse it's probably going to get. So increased human presence and regular pasture patrols, they can help identify wolf activity via tracks and scat that you see out there in your pasture. It can discourage wolf activity, help detect wolf kills. You might see some eagles or ravens and go over there and there's a carcass. And occasionally it can interrupt a depredation. This is a Minnesota cowgirl. You'll see what she does here in a minute. I hope it plays. Oh, the sound is the best part. Yeah, if you got sound, we'll play this again.
Fucker! Get out of here! Get out of here!
So anyway, she's on her horse, and she had the backbone to run up on that wolf and start hollering at it, and had to drop a few cuss words on it to get it to leave, and get her cell phone out and record that. So anyway, so she interrupted that depredation. It doesn't mean that the wolf didn't come back and kill that calf the next day or whatever, but it helped for that day. So wolves readily scavenge. We mentioned this before, but I just can't reiterate enough. They readily scavenge on dead livestock, and open carcass disposal just invites predators to livestock production areas, increasing the potential for depredations. The longer they spend in your pasture, the more likely they are to kill something. So we developed, and it sounds like Manitoba has done a very similar thing here, is carcass compost exclosures. And the fact is, and you guys know this way better than I do, livestock carcasses, especially adult cattle, can be really difficult to manage. Losses that happen in the middle of the winter, the ground's frozen, the snow is deep, whatever, and it's easy to forget about them. But then what happens is you have a cow die in January, and it's out there in the back 40, there's no wolves around, you're worried about other things. Well, here comes March, that cow thaws out, and you're calving on the same quarter section or nearby, and again, that wolf pack's right there on top of you. So a carcass compost pen just keeps wolves from getting a free meal, basically. And it's not very big in terms of fencing. That's one roll of fence. That's 333 feet. That's kind of what our design was with a gate. Can be composted in there. That's money well spent for a lot of producers, unless they have access to a track hoe or already have a pre-dug hole or have a rendering service, which is really uncommon in our part of the world. But have a carcass disposal plan. Donkeys. Um, donkeys are a increasingly popular livestock guarding animal in Minnesota, and a number of producers use them. There hasn't been a government program to place donkeys. It's just been producer to producer, word of mouth, and I've seen it help lots of times. I think I've also seen wolves kill donkeys, and um, I've seen lots of wolf damage where there was donkeys in the pasture. So it's not a I put donkeys out there, I'm good now scenario, but donkeys that are raised with livestock, especially in wolf country, can do some good. It seems like the females are particularly they're probably your preferred animals. If someone's really interested in donkeys and wants to know more about them, catch up with me later today, and I can put you in contact with a producer in Minnesota who's used them pretty extensively and knows way more about them than I do. But anyway, donkeys, they're pretty low maintenance, right? They eat whatever the cows are eating. Not a lot of maintenance. You're gonna have to trim hooves once a year, but that's about it. Livestock guarding dogs, on the other hand, are a little bit higher maintenance. Livestock guarding dogs are, they're an old world technique that's been used in Europe and Asia forever, and they can be effective. Livestock guarding dogs are fairly expensive to get initial cost from a reputable breeder. Traditionally, at least on the US side, they've been used most effectively in conjunction with a herder. Think of a Western situation where there's a sheep herder, a band of sheep on public land following grass up the mountain in the summer. And they're all together out there as a unit. Livestock guarding dogs, herder, herding dogs, sheep, camp, they're all together. It's a little bit different with the agricultural situation we have here in this region, and especially related to beef. These animals have some challenges. They need to be essentially bonded to the type of livestock that that they're supposed to protect. That's been done, I think, done to a better degree with sheep than with cattle. I do know some cattle producers who use them. I've seen mixed results. One of the messages is use enough dogs, and you'll get different ideas on how many dogs per number head of livestock. But essentially, remember, the local wolf pack views, your dogs as canine competitors as another wolf pack. And if one or two wolves come in, or 3 or 4 or 5 wolves come into your pasture, and there's only 1 or 2 dogs, the wolves are going to win, right? So if you can have multiple dogs out there to kind of seem like a resident wolf pack that's in with those livestock, it can help. One of the big challenges about livestock guarding dogs in northern climates is it's a seasonal job, right? They're only out there April through October. And you don't want them at home under the porch in the summertime when they should be out on pasture, but that's where they were. They were at home by the wood stove all winter, right? Or in the barn or wherever. So it's hard to flip that switch. And we're learning more about livestock guarding dogs. And so they're a tool, and they're not for every producer. They're not a piece of equipment that you park when you're not using it. It's you guys know all about animals. It's a year-round commitment. Fladry is an old European wolf hunting technique, and it's this row of flags is all it is. You can see these red flags. It's not super clear, but those are red flags, and these are all flags hanging off just a temporary wire, and traditionally used to hunt wolves. And it's not really a physical barrier to wolves. It's just kind of a psychological barrier. They see it. They see those flags moving in the wind. They don't want to go in there. It can be electrified. When it's electrified, somebody came up with the name turbo fladry, and I don't know if it really shocks the wolf. I mean, I think that's the common misconception, but all those flags on that wire drain a lot of the current, and so they're not really hot, but they're hot enough. If you got to put those up on the inside of your fence, having them electrified even a little bit keeps them hot enough to keep your cattle from licking it and trashing it and rendering it inoperable. So, but otherwise, they can be really hard to electrify on bigger pastures. We found their best application was smaller areas, like a springtime calving pasture. And by the time your cattle get out on summer pasture. The pastures are too big, and it just doesn't seem to work. And flattery is temporary. It's not something you put up and, hey, I got flattery up, I'm good. It's based on the novel. It's based on the newness. And so, I get varying degrees from different biologists that I talk to, but I've seen them get used to it in a matter of weeks and go in there. But generally 30, 60, 90, 100 days is probably the maximum effectiveness you're going to get out of it. Some fencing. So we built, when I say we, I should have explained this earlier, but I worked for most of my career for a branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture called Wildlife Services. And that's what we did, is we worked with wolf, wolf damage issues. And a lot of trapping, a lot of wolf removal. And but we had some situations where we thought a fence was most appropriate. So we built this pilot fence. This was a combination, smallish, very smallish by Manitoba standards. The missus had sheep and the mister had cows, and of course the sheep were kind of the low-hanging fruit when it came to predation. And so we built the fence around the sheep, and just a physical woven wire fence with an apron. And we built that thing in 2020, and there hasn't been any losses there. She's also got one livestock guarding dog inside there, and she night pens her sheep. But she had issues just about every year for 20 plus years. So anyway, fencing can work. We'll talk about some of the limitations with fencing. So this is a little bit bigger project. So what happens when your other non-lethal measures aren't working? A permanent fence can be a solution, but it's very expensive. And it's probably cost prohibitive at the producer level. I've only known really one producer who was wealthy enough and motivated enough to fence his own place. Otherwise, it's been collaboration with public resources, state, federal, NGOs. And so here's the other thing is, imagine every table out here is a cow pasture, right? There's a quarter section, whatever. And there's places that are stocked like this, and there's cows at every table and every pasture. And if you commit a bunch of resources and you fence off this pasture right here, what are the wolves that used to be going in there, what are they going to do? They're just going there or there or there. You're just blowing the leaves in your neighbor's yard, right? So what we found, or kind of what my idea was, and it seems sound, is that you want to have an isolated place. Like you're the only producer in that wolf pack territory, and you've got a history of chronic wolf problems. That might be a place to fence and just get it off the radar, get it out of the system, and keep those cows alive. So anyway, you can see it's pretty big production, and this was a collaborative effort. In northeastern Minnesota, and 1.75 miles, is 1,500 acres. That's big by Minnesota standards, not big by Manitoba standards. So you can start to run the money and the price on this. This was north of $100,000 US to fence this place, and so it's just really, again, cost prohibitive at the producer level generally. And the reason I point out some of these methods, even though they might not be effective or a good fit, is in your business and in my business, we're chronically being targeted by people who don't think wolves should ever be killed for any reason. And in fact, they sometimes think cattle shouldn't be on some of these landscapes, right? That's wolf country. You shouldn't raise cattle there. And so we need to arm ourselves with some facts and some data to say, yeah, I'd love to have a fence. If you want to pay to fence my place, I'll do it, but I cannot afford to put a fence up. And we've got some data to show what works and what doesn't work. I'm a fan of physical rather than electric, just because you don't have to rely on power. And so anyway, we just went with woven wire fence. We were trying to hit the best price point, if you will. We started off with 49-inch fence, woven wire, and then we went up to 72-inch. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. And then we did a ground apron. A ground apron is really important. Wolves are really capable jumpers. They can jump, I've seen them in captive settings jump over as high as I can reach with my hand, but they would much rather duck underneath the bottom of a fence like this tall right here, or even dig underneath. So an apron's really important if you're in any kind of a fencing project. This was just surrounded by public forest. Again, it was a collaborative effort. The USDA, the National Wildlife Research Center in the States, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, the producer was very proactive, and he had a lot of the equipment to install the fence. The Voyagers Wolf Project, as well as some groups like Howling for Wolves and the Humane Society of the United States. So it was one of those rare times in my career where I can't say it was middle ground, but we found some common ground among a lot of groups. And there's definitely some benefit to that. When you get someone in the room that 5 years ago all you did was throw rocks at each other, and you get in a room and have a cup of coffee and talk about a fence, and you all have some skin in the game with a common goal, it helps. So there's some secondary benefits to projects like that. So researchers had wolves collared in the area. You can see over here, you can barely see it, but if you look, the lighter colored is the cleared area. That's essentially all pasture. And you can see it's hidden underneath all these dots here. And those dots are radio-collared wolf movements. You can see there's concentrations outside, but there's a ton of them right there. After the fence gets up, those wolves are all staying on the outside. Almost all of them. So I'm going to see if I can make this thing play. Dean, can you see that? Yeah, click on that and see if something happens. Well, while Dean's pulling it up, thank you, Dean. So what happened is it keeps most of the wolves out most of the time, but we built this fence. We finished it like 2 years ago, roughly. And is it working? Is it not working? There's no losses. It seems good. The producer's not seeing wolves. We're getting kind of mixed signals, but because they had these radio-collared wolves out there, we essentially had like auditors, right? They were out there showing us where any deficiencies were in the fence. And one of these wolves would repeatedly jump over this. It would go to the 49-inch and jump over, and the other one would dig under. So if this will play here in a minute, you'll see how aggressive this wolf is trying to get into the pasture. This is where there was a hole. There's an apron there. And, the producer threw some logs and fence posts in there because they saw there was a hole under there until we could patch it. But, man, she really wants in. And so she's bound and determined to get in there. And so that's the importance of a good ground apron, growing into the grass, and really regular fence inspections. Because you can put a lot of money into a fence, a hole gets underneath, you're back to square one, because some wolves are going to find out how to get in there. And some dig and some jump. So we had some fence auditors there that really helped, because it was a pilot project, really helped us learn quite a bit. Some other fencing options, and sure. Some other fencing options, 7-strand high tensile electric. Cindy out here. She's probably busy helping somebody, but Cindy Jack from Manitoba Agriculture has been a huge help to me with these trapper workshops, and she provided me some pictures here of this 7-strand electric. That can be useful for predators. This fence here is very similar to the one we built, and then this is more of an electro net, more of a sheep fence with a guard dog inside. Not a lot of application for beef producers with that kind of fence, but this one, potentially, depending on your operation. This isn't really a huge deal, but think of it, especially, you guys have more elk in your country than we do, and protecting stored forage, The problem with elk is you don't have one or two, you got a herd, right? So if you got 40 elk coming into your bale yard or whatever you have for stored forage, and the local wolf pack's going to be right behind because that's their winter food source, right? So anyway, if you can fence that off, keep it in a shed, however you do it, that's going to be to your benefit. So we're going to talk a little bit about lethal wolf removal here. So here's the thing about lethal wolf removal. If you aren't having predator problems, consider not killing predators. And that's kind of counter to some of the other messaging you'll get from me, but just think about it. The wolves that you kill might be replaced by wolves. The ones that you kill that aren't killing livestock might be replaced by wolves that are killing livestock, and you might have just created more of a problem for yourself. So the Manitoba Targeted Predator Removal Program, it's following mass documented losses and in chronic problem municipalities, I think is a very good tool. It's citizen-based with trappers. And based on wolf removal on the U.S. side of the border, where we would remove about 200 wolves annually from northern Minnesota with staff trappers, not citizen-based trappers. But, we would average like 2.3 wolves removed per effort. And that really helped. So in 2021, only 5% of the producers had additional losses that season. So wolf removal is going to help you out for that season. If you take out the whole pack, it might help you out that season and the next year, but it's not forever. But it helps you get through the season, and that's really what you guys do every single year, right? And but it's supported by some scientific data that says, longer time to next loss based on how many wolves you removed, and that targeted removal significantly reduced the recurrent presence of depredations. Both of those studies were from Montana. You can research those more if you'd like. So here's some more things that you can do. Because Manitoba producers can shoot a wolf legally to defend their property, and you've got long liberal wolf season, when you're out there checking cattle, hauling mineral, checking fences, doing pasture patrols, keep a centerfire rifle with you, have it sighted in, and have it ready to use if you see a wolf interacting with your cattle. I will guarantee you, if you want to see a wolf today, leave your gun at home. That's the day you'll see the wolf. I mean, that's just how that goes, right? So, provincial assistance. So it's really important to document and report losses, to register a claim with MASC within 72 hours of discovering the attack. When it comes to documenting the losses, take some good clear photos from several angles, get the entire carcass, close-ups of the trauma that could help the investigator, cover the carcass until the investigator can get there, take pictures of any tracks or scat you see there. And so those are some things on the documenting the loss side. And regarding the agency people, again, just a plug to work with your agency people. Get to know them, establish a working relationship with them. So when you have trouble and you need to work with them on a predation issue, you already know their name. They know your name. They know where you live. They know that you're doing some non-lethal things, and it's just going to go smoother that way. So the current targeted predator removal program administered by the Manitoba Trappers Association and funded by the province, it allows 40 hours of service time plus mileage for wolf damage calls with the possibility of an extension. So to access the program, a livestock producer must first be eligible for compensation due to losses under the Wildlife Damage Compensation Program. And additionally, there's a harvest incentive of $50 per wolf for the trapper, and a $50 one-time equipment usage fee is provided since the trapper will be using their own traps. So I've spent a ton of time over the years trapping wolves, and 40 hours is generally not enough to resolve a problem unless that trapper is really close to your property. And if there's any kind of windshield time, if they're coming from more than 10 or 20 miles away, that time is going to add up and get burned up pretty fast. So that trapper might want to ask you or someone on the farm to check traps for them occasionally to make that last 15 or 20 days or maybe even longer to stretch out that 40 hours. So I would say be prepared to do that. I'm going to take a quick peek at my notes here. Yeah, that's really it on that. But one thing to notice as we talk about some things on the next slide is look at where these wolves are caught. Cow trail, field road, cow trail. Those are all the same places your cows go. It's all the same places you go with your quad or your side-by-side or your pickup or your tractor. So that'll come into play here when we talk about, what can you do to help the trapper help you. So first of all, as trappers are people too, right? So get to know them and establish a good working relationship with them. Communicate regularly with them. Where the cattle are now, where they're headed to next, when your haying and harvest plans are, when you might have equipment on roads or trails that they have traps on. Because remember, they're going to be trapping on those same roads and trails that you're traveling on and your cows are on. So wolf traps are expensive. If they get run over by farming equipment, traps can be damaged. Your equipment can be damaged. And worst case or best case scenario is that trap's sprung and it can't catch a wolf. And remember, that wolf's got this 2 or 3 township area it's ranging over, and you might be waiting a week or 10 days to have one opportunity for a wolf to come through your trap line. And as a trapper, you want to get that wolf caught. And as a producer, you want their trapper to get that wolf caught so that he doesn't have to spend another week or 2 out there, and maybe you could be incurring losses in that subsequent time. So get to know your trapper, work with them, communicate, swap phone numbers right away. Advise the trappers of any hunters on the property. Some things you can do, like on the first day, is show them around the place. Show them your boundaries. Show them where you've seen wolves, wolf tracks, wolf scat, where wolves have been caught in the past. If you happen to have some dead stock out there, show them where that is. If it's something you maybe have out in the pasture you haven't had time to got rid of yet, that can be a really good place to catch wolves. And show them where they can go, where they can't go. And we're messaging to the trappers through the trapper workshops how to work with you guys too, because I've seen both sides of this for many years, and I've seen some of that miscommunication we heard about from Patty this morning. So I haven't got any texts of a toilet though, but you never know. There's still time, yeah. So let your neighbors know, and that's actually one of the requirements of the program. Tie your dog up or confine it, or your dog's going to get caught in a trap. But really, this is one of the main things I wanted to get out there is it's really challenging. If you remember back where those wolves were caught, they're caught right where your cows are, right? It's really, really challenging for the trapper to catch wolves in a pasture with cows. So do whatever you can to work with them. If you have a fresh kill, there's a window of 3 nights where those wolves might come back and feed on that carcass. If you've got the ability to move your cows into another pasture and let the trapper trap around that carcass for a few nights, that might be the quickest way to get those wolves caught. Can't always be done, I understand that. Late winter, early spring, before your cows are on pasture, if you've got losses at home or, like in a calving area, and you've got big open pastures with no cows in them, that's a great time to get the trapper out into those empty pastures to take advantage of those cow trails, those great gate crossings. All those same areas you and your cows travel through are the same places the wolves travel through, and those are the places to catch them. Follow the trapper's instructions. If they ask you to check traps, work with them on that, and handling and disposal of any animal caught. So if you're checking traps for the trapper, check them in the morning. Have your rifle with you and ready to go. You don't want to be out there, oh crap, there's a wolf jumping around the trap. You go home, get your rifle, you come back, the wolf's gone. You've lost, the trapper's lost. That wolf's going to be harder to catch next time. Binoculars can be useful for checking traps from a distance. Was working with the trappers to work with you guys if they're trapping. If you're checking the traps one day, you got a wolf in a trap, you shoot it, probably take it out of the trap, bring it out to a gate, a yard somewhere away from the other traps. Lots of times trappers could have 6 traps in an area as big as this room, and if we caught a wolf right here and there's a dead wolf in it overnight that you shot that morning, a wolf isn't going to probably come around and get caught in those other traps. So get that wolf out of there so those other traps might catch another wolf. So late winter snaring, early spring trapping, can be really effective, especially if you catch that adult female wolf, because then you don't have any pups. You don't have all those summertime problems we talked about earlier with provisioning pups and feeding all those teenagers. Consider the trapper's costs, right? So they're going to come with a quad, a 4-wheel drive, maybe the quad's on a trailer. Good wolf traps are probably going to be almost $100 each by the time they got chain and all the attachments on them. They're going to need at least 15 or 20 for your one place. They might have 50 of them. Fuel's high. Everything's high right now. So consider helping the trapper out. Buy him a tank of gas. Do what you can to help him out. Thank them when they're done, right? So trappers are human too. A good, heartfelt, genuine thanks from a hardworking neighbor is going to go a long way. And that's going to get them back there and motivate them to help you out next time if they can. So it's easy to vent on the trapper, right? Because they're the person who came out and they're kind of a symbol of the government, and it's easy to start throwing rocks at them, but get along with them, work with them, have a good relationship. So, in the end, there's really no silver bullet, right? We talked about this toolbox. It's not that deep, but it's there. There's no one silver bullet that's going to magically stop all predation to livestock. So use all your available tools, be creative and adapt as you can, realizing that some losses to wolves should be expected in some parts of the province. Part of this is managing your expectations too. And, a couple shout outs here, and then we can do questions. Manitoba Agriculture, the Wildlife Branch, the Manitoba Trappers Association have been really helpful to me with these trapper workshops. On the home front back in Minnesota, some of these slides and data came from my time with USDA Wildlife Services, and some of them came from the Voyageurs Wolf Project. And a big shout out to Ray Whitmore, who's with Manitoba Agriculture, and he couldn't be with us today. Ray is officed in Gimli, many of you know him. But he had the foresight to reach out maybe 4 years ago and come to Minnesota for a wolf conference. And as long as he was coming for a conference, he said, I wonder what they do for damage control in Minnesota. And he reached out to us, connected with us, spent a day in a trap line with one of our trappers, got to meet some producers, got to really understand the program. And that fostered this relationship that he have and this invite back to Manitoba. So anyway, Ray Whitmore was really instrumental in putting that together and the foundation of that. So if you see Ray, thank him. And that's really about it. So this is kind of funny. I didn't title this talk. Someone else threw the title on there, and it's a great title, Keeping the Wolf from the Door. But this is actually our family hunting and trapping cabin. And that wolf is literally at the door. So anyway, that's really all I've got. Happy to take any questions that anybody has, and I'll be around here the rest of the day if people don't want to ask a question or they have a lengthier question. You can corner me later at a break or whatever. So that's what I have for my presentation.
Hello. Thanks. Just wanted to mention attending some of John's workshops, and just one tip I'm not sure we brushed over today about when you're, as a producer, working with the trappers and he asks you to check the traps. Don't be stomping all over them and right.
Yeah, so this is fun, kind of funny, right? So traps are buried in the ground. They're wolves are pretty smart. They have good eyesight and whatever, and you bury the trap below grade, and the trapper might say, I've got 4 traps between that gate and this gate, and the farmer wants to check the traps, and he doesn't realize what you guys need to understand is a wolf in a trap is going to be jumping around. It's going to be obvious from maybe a quarter mile away if it's open. And you don't need to physically see that exact trap, but I've had this happen a lot. Producers he said there was a trap here somewhere, and they spring the trap, or more likely they're on the quad. They're buzzing around, run over the trap, right? Trap gets run over, can't catch a wolf. So follow the trapper's instructions and try to check them from a distance if you can, if the trapper's relying on you to check traps. So thanks for pointing that out.
Any questions for John?
Can you comment on any other predators or predation or what predator gets blamed with others killed?
Good, very, very good question. Very good question. Is about could I comment on various predators? Does one predator ever get blamed for losses from another? Yes. And in Minnesota, I look at 4 predators we have. Wolves, of course, we talked mostly about them. Coyotes, I would say coyotes kill more livestock in Minnesota than wolves do, far and away, just because they're higher density and they occupy the whole state. But wolves get all the attention because they're federally protected and they're bigger and they sometimes eat more, right? we've got a lot of black bears in Minnesota, and they don't kill a lot of cattle. It might be different here. You guys seem to even have more black bears in parts of the province than we do. Domestic dogs will sometimes kill calves. Here's your clues if you got a domestic dog, is if you got animals that are killed and not fed on, and if you got 2 or 3 or 4 wounded animals and they're not killed outright and one's dead and it's not fed on, those are some triggers you might be dealing with domestic dogs. We don't really have very many cougars in Minnesota. You guys have more than us, so I don't know much about cougar damage. But in Minnesota, to your point, producers are compensated for wolf damage, but not for coyote damage. So every single time me or one of our trappers was out at a place doing an investigation, there was a propensity for the producer to, oh, you sure it isn't wolf damage, because they could get paid for that. So we got pretty darn good at sorting it out, but there's some gray area and some overlap, and it can be hard. And one of the hardest things is scavenging. So there's a dead animal out there, it's relatively fresh, it's being fed on, but was it really predation, or was it just a dead animal? So good question.
Is there any trapping workshops coming up this fall and the spring so that we can all get our hands kind of?
Yeah, there's one tomorrow. Birds Hill Provincial Park on the other side of Winnipeg.
8:30 start? Is that
8:30
right,
start,
Cindy?
yep.
We have a full crowd, but I guess if there's interest, we can definitely look at bringing John back up for the future, or so if you get us a list of names, and is Carlisle still here? No. Oh, some other Manitoba Ag people that can help me. Look at, we got money, John. We'll bring you back. Yeah.
So here's one cautionary while you're taking the next question. So as producers, right, who has extra time in their day? Raise your hand if you have extra time in the day from April through October, right? Nobody does, right? Trapping can be like, almost a full-time job even on your place, right? So here's been my experience. I've known some producers that became very good wolf trappers, very proficient at it, but by and large, producers are too darn busy and they just don't have the time. They oftentimes have the background, hands-on, they know the property, they know where the wolves are. They don't have the time to do it right. And if you start trapping at these wolves and don't catch them, and then you have a loss and the trapper shows up, it's going to be a lot harder for the trapper to catch the wolves. So this is my advice is, if you got wolf issues, keep your rifle handy every single day and shoot everyone that's interacting with your cattle. Maybe do some snaring in the wintertime, but leave the foothold trapping to an experienced trapper unless you or a family member really has the time and equipment to dedicate to that. Otherwise, you might think you're helping yourself, but you might not be helping yourself as much as you think, because you might be educating more wolves than you're catching.
So I came to this seminar for John. He knows that now. 2.5 years of battling wolves for myself and other producers. And I want to say your presentation is the best I've heard in 2.5 years. I want to give that credit. I hope there's the government officials here that will review this, because a conversation needs to happen sooner than later. And we all need to be at the table to come to acceptable solutions. Because right now, the onus is felt that this is the producer's fault. And the producer, you're having to deal with this on your own. And that is not sustainable for the agriculture industry, for young producers to be in the business, and for the type of regenerative farming we're trying to produce, of get that cow back out on the land. So I think I wish there would be natural resources people here. The biologists of Manitoba should have been here. I know there's agriculture people here, but they have to learn to step out of the box. Don't be afraid that you can't talk to someone above you, because you're not allowed to. Everyone should be allowed to communicate and get that message that we need the advantage onto the trapper. He should not be restricted into a box. He needs the advantage, not the wolf. Anyways, thank you.
Yeah, no, appreciate that, Carla. And yeah, the challenges of wolves and livestock are just, they're universal, and they're almost timeless. You'd think that something that had been occurring for hundreds of years wouldn't be happening yet, but it still is. And one of the complications, and I would agree with you, and it's the same on our side of the border, is is, and you guys see with other issues, I'm sure, is wolves are a natural resources on the agency side. Our natural resources are wildlife branch type. And then on the ag side, it's producers and agriculture people. And sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And I think, coming to the table together and having some conversations with agriculture, natural resources, and producers is probably a really good idea. So thank you.
I'd hate to cut off some good conversation, but Pam's giving me the look. No, just kidding. So if you could join me in thanking John for an excellent talk.